Some people ask me why I lost interest in Pokémon. I usually shrug it off with the typical, "I grew up" excuse. But that's far from the truth. The real reason is something I've never dared to tell anyone until now. Maybe sharing it will help me make sense of what I saw that day. This is the story of the game that turned my love for Pokémon into a waking nightmare. This is the story of Pokémon Rotting Yellow. I'd been working at a local video game store for over a year without incident. The worst I'd dealt with were scratched discs and customers trying to haggle over trade-ins. But one day, everything changed. I was working alone when a boy came in no older than 10. There was something odd about him. He clutched a Game Boy Color cartridge tightly in his small hands, almost like it was the only thing keeping him grounded. I was surprised. Kids that young rarely knew what a Game Boy Color even was, let alone owned one. "Need help with something?" I asked. The boy nodded, his voice quiet and shaky. "My game's broken. It freezes in the same spot every time. And my Pokémon keep dying." That last part caught me off guard. Pokémon don't die in the usual sense, not in the mainline games. But I brushed it off, figuring he was just frustrated. "Did you buy it here?" I asked. He shook his head. "My dad gave it to me. But he said it's not safe." "Not safe?" He just stared at me with wide eyes, then quickly changed the subject. Against my better judgment, I agreed to look at the game. The cartridge felt cold and heavier than it should have been as I took it from him. As I examined it, I noticed the label was off. Instead of Pikachu's cheerful face on the front, there was a dark smear where its eyes should have been. The edges of the sticker looked burnt. "Where did your dad get this?" I asked. He mumbled something I couldn't make out, left his name and number, and hurried out the door without another word. I slid the cartridge into the top drawer beneath the register and forgot about it until closing time. But as I locked up for the night, something gnawed at me. Curiosity, maybe? Nostalgia? I don't know. I slipped the game into my bag before heading home. When I got there, I dug out my old Game Boy, dusted it off, and popped in fresh batteries. I was eager to relive a bit of childhood magic and fix whatever weak team the boy was struggling with. But as soon as I pulled the cartridge from my bag, unease crept over me. The sticker seemed worse. The scratches on Pikachu's eyes looked deeper now, jagged and deliberate. I brushed it off as a trick of the light, told myself I was imagining things, and slotted the game into the console. The Game Freak logo appeared. The opening sequence played, but something was off. The usual cheerful music was gone. Silence. Pure, oppressive silence. I reached the title screen, which was similarly muted. The letters Pokémon Yellow looked decayed, like they'd been left to rot, but I was too stubborn to stop. I selected the boy's save file, expecting to jump into the game. Instead, a message appeared. "The save file is corrupt." Strange. The boy had been adamant that his save was fine, just frozen in one part. I tried again and again, but the same message appeared every time. Frustrated, I started a new game. At first, everything seemed normal. I picked my starter, trained my team, and progressed through the first few towns. But when I reached Cerulean City, the game glitched. Without warning, the screen flickered and I was transported to Lavender Town. I froze. Lavender Town wasn't supposed to come up yet. The music, if you could call it that, started playing. The notes were warped, slower, and more dissonant than I remembered. It felt wrong, like the melody was alive watching me. I tried to move my character, but they wouldn't respond. Instead, the screen darkened, pixel by pixel, until all that was left was my reflection in the black screen. And then, a text box appeared. "Why did you take me?" Chills ran down my spine. I hadn't pressed anything. The game spoke again. "You can't fix this. You can't fix me." My hands trembled as I powered off the Game Boy and threw it across the room. The screen went black, but that eerie silence lingered in the air, like the game's presence was still there, watching. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I returned the cartridge to the store and called the boy's number. But when I dialed, the line was disconnected. I never saw the boy again. I don't know what that game was or why it ended up in my hands. But I do know one thing: I'll never touch Pokémon again. The strange sequence of events made me think about the infamous Mew glitch, something I'd only heard about in whispers from old gaming forums. Maybe the kid had tried it and botched it, causing the game to malfunction. That thought almost calmed me, offering a rational explanation. But the feeling of unease never fully left me. Determined to see it through, I wandered the outskirts of Lavender Town. To my surprise, the glitch seemed active. A wild Mew appeared right before me. But instead of the usual battle theme, the Lavender Town music continued to play. It was slower now, stretched and distorted, each note crawling into my ears like a warning. That's when I noticed something off. None of the battle options worked. No fight, no item, no Pokémon. The only option I could select was run. I hesitated. Who wouldn't want to catch a Mew? Frustrated but unwilling to lose progress, I selected run. The screen flickered and I was back on the overworld map. The game continued normally for a while. I made my way to Celadon City and obtained the Sylph Scope. Everything seemed fine until I returned to Lavender Town for the Pokémon Tower mission. That's when the game began to unravel again. Instead of traveling through each floor, I was immediately teleported to the top, where the soul of Marowak was supposed to appear. The encounter began, but something was wrong. There was no music, just silence. The kind of silence that pressed against your chest and made you feel like you couldn't breathe. The wild Marowak appeared, as expected. But then it morphed, pixel by pixel, into Mew. My Pikachu entered the battle. I tried to attack, but every move barely scratched Mew, even though my Pikachu was far higher in level. Stranger still, Mew never attacked back. It just stared. I finally weakened it enough and threw a Pokeball, hoping that catching it would restore the game to normal. But the instant the ball hit Mew, its sprite flickered and distorted, transforming into the unidentifiable ghost sprite, the one you'd see in Pokémon Tower without the Sylph Scope. Then, the screen went black. When the screen returned, the text read, "Ash whited out." I stared at the screen, confused. Pikachu hadn't fainted. None of my other Pokémon had been touched. And yet, instead of restarting at the Pokémon Center, I was placed back at the final door of the cemetery. This time, something was different. Pikachu wasn't following me. I wandered forward, toward where the battle had taken place. A single tombstone now stood near the center of the room. I pressed a Saviko, Tumiko Tubunas. I pressed a Sindasid near the center of the room. I pressed a Simda of the room. The sound of Pikachu's fainting cry rang out, distorted and broken. Pikachu was dead. I wanted to stop playing, but I couldn't tear myself away. My hands moved on their own, compelled by some sick need to understand what was happening. The Marowak reappeared. Again, it transformed into Mew. This time I sent out Pidgeot. The battle started normally until Pidgeot attacked on its own. Mew's health dropped to a sliver. It used Destiny Bond. Pidgeot attacked again, without my input. The screen flashed, and a message appeared. Mew evaded the attack. Then Mew used Curse. Its health drained to 0, and it vanished from the battlefield. But instead of celebrating my victory, I watched in horror as Pidgeot's sprite shattered, pixel by pixel, before disappearing entirely. Another message appeared. Pidgeot fainted. The screen went black again. When it returned, I was standing in front of a new tombstone. My hands trembled as I pressed a Pidgeot's fainting cry warped and mournful echoed in my ears. One by one, my Pokémon were being erased. I tried to stop, but it was useless. Every time I restarted, I was led back to the same room to face another battle with Mew. Every time, one of my Pokémon would fall, replaced by another tombstone. The music, if you could even call it, that grew worse with each encounter. low, guttural tones mixed with distorted cries of fainting Pokémon. When my final Pokémon was gone, the screen faded to black. I sat there staring at the console, hoping it was over. Then, a single line of text appeared. "You shouldn't have run." The Game Boy powered off on its own. I threw the console across the room and backed away, my heart pounding. I haven't touched a Pokémon game since. And I never will. The battle began again, right where my Pidgeot had fallen. One by one, each of my remaining Pokémon was wiped out, reduced to nothing but empty tombstones. The screen flashed a few more times, and soon, I was left with no Pokémon at all. I expected the usual whiteout message to appear, the game resetting to the Pokémon Center where I could try again. But instead, something far worse happened. My character me was forced into the fight. It was ridiculous. How could I, the player, be expected to battle Mew? Yet, some twisted part of me couldn't bring myself to turn off the game. Something held me there, pulling me deeper into whatever nightmare this had become. There was no way for me to attack Mew. I didn't even think it could attack me. But then, Mew did something I couldn't comprehend. It used Curse and Destiny Bond on me. How could a Pokémon use those moves on a human? I didn't even have time to process it. My screen flashed once, twice, and then I whited out. When the game came back, I didn't appear in the cemetery. I wasn't even in a normal town. I was in my bedroom in Pallet Town, except it wasn't my bedroom. It felt hollow, wrong. I quickly realized something was deeply off. My character was transparent, barely there. The absence of music only deepened the dread that settled in my chest. I took a few steps, trying to shake off the cold fear that was creeping up my spine, when the menu screen popped up. My trainer card appeared, but it was a blank mockery of what it should have been. No badges, no money. My Pokédex, empty. I closed it, heart pounding, and the menu popped up again. This time, it showed that I had a Pokémon in my party. But there was no sprite, no name. Just a blank space next to the HP bar. I opened the Pokémon's moveset to check, hoping for something familiar, but there was only one move: teleport. I tried to leave the room, but the door wouldn't open. I tried interacting with the computer, the map, but nothing responded. There was nothing left to do. So I used teleport, unsure of where it would take me, desperate for an escape from this suffocating nightmare. The screen blinked, and I found myself standing in the cemetery again. But this time there was something that twisted my gut in a way I couldn't explain. A new tombstone had appeared. It was mine. My character's name was etched into the stone. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to throw the Game Boy across the room, but my body wouldn't listen. I couldn't escape. I walked numb toward the spot where I knew the battle with Mew should have taken place. But this time, when the battle sequence began, it wasn't Mew standing in front of me. It was a trainer. And on my side of the screen, the sprite was no longer the familiar Pidgeot or Pikachu. It was a Marowak. I froze, my blood running cold, as the trainer sent out his Pokémon. Marowak transformed into Mew. I checked my moves. There was no teleport now. Only two moves, Curse and Destiny Bond. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The game had twisted beyond anything I could understand. This was no longer a game. I couldn't bear it anymore. I turned off the console, the sick feeling of dread sinking deeper into my gut. I couldn't stay away for long. Hours later, I convinced myself to turn it back on, just to check if the save file was still there. But it was gone. The file was corrupt. The boy who had brought me this cursed cartridge never came back. I can't say I blame him. I'm sure he knew. He must have known something was wrong with that game, something that shouldn't have been there. Maybe he just wanted to rid himself of it. I wish I could say the same.